Hello, hello, zdravo, merhaba.
Yasu, zdravite, pešendiete, bună ziua. I guess I did my part good right now for the first start. Welcome to another episode of Babylon Balkan Show, ladies and gentlemen. It is our deepest pleasure to introduce our newest guest. Her name is Ana Knežević. She comes from Serbia, Belgrade. She is art historian, also independent researcher, and curator at the Museum of African Arts. And that's why we're here today. She knows a lot about this topic, about African culture, about this interconnection between Africa, African nations, and ex-Yugoslavia uh, area. She's also doing her PhD thesis at the Faculty of Philosophy concerning the museology and heritology, and she has a really interesting topic concerning the cultural memory and how it's preserved in cyberspace. You'll learn more about it. It's very interesting, and she does a lot of things concerning the digital area of promoting the museum and the culture and everything surrounding it, making online heritage maps and so on, and publishing a lot of articles concerning the African culture and so on.
Yeah, it will be definitely an interesting episode. We're planning to cover her life in Museum of African Art and also about the history of that museum. It sounds really interesting for me, especially because never heard it before, and I'm very curious. Also, we will cover non-aligned movement, and we are curious about what's this movement, what was the countries that involve, and how it is the impact of this movement today. What else? I also have some uh, curiosity about the topics like about her education and also her academics side, like memes, um, cyber culture. Those are will be covered in this episode.
Yeah. Especially memes. We're really looking forward to
Uh-huh.
seeing what she has to say about memes from an academic point of view. So, our dear audience, stay tuned and don't forget to click everything that's appearing at your screen or at Spotify, wherever. So make sure makes a big difference for us and helps us to get this algorithm pushed to reach out to as many people as possible. So
Yes.
yeah.
Please like, subscribe, and keep continue following us.
We are really grateful for all the things that you've done by now and just continue like this. So, on it, without further ado, let's welcome Ana.
Hello.
Okay, and we are back with our newest guest. Welcome, Ana.
Hello, Ella.
Hello, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you today with us.
It's a pleasure to be also part of your podcast for me.
Especially on this day, the 25th of May, that we're going to be published this episode. It's the Africa Day, and we're going to go into deep into this topic and why we're having where we are having you today with us. But first thing first, we have this typical thing with our episodes where we ask our
Mhm.
guests some things about themselves before we go deep dive into our episode. So, Onat, if you may.
Yes, for your bucket list, what is the top three things and why?
Okay, well, maybe we can make it short. Movies, architecture, and nature, because everything of these three are enjoying for me.
Uh-huh.
Mhm. And I'm guessing you're living it fully. All those three things that you like, you have it in your daily life, right?
Well, I'm not just living it. I mean, I'm dreaming that I will live it
Okay.
eventually.
Okay. And why do you have those things in your top three as a top things in your bucket list?
Well, because I like movies and architecture also. It is also related to my professional life because as an art historian, I believe movies and architecture are the best form of art because they are the most related to, everyday life and
Hmm.
people in general. They are not elite in a way.
Mhm.
And nature is something that we are maybe that we miss most actually in this life.
Mm. Yeah, makes sense. I agree with you. Um, the question from my side, it's quite usual, is when you were little, what did you want to be when you grow up?
Well, I had a lot of ideas, and it changed through time. Recently, I visited my friend in my hometown, and there I saw these memoirs we had while
Hmm.
we were kids. So I wrote, for example, teacher. But what is interesting, I had an experience as an art teacher a few years ago, and it is not my dream, definitely. But I had an experience.
Especially with nowadays kids. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not as back then.
yeah.
It's a bigger headache. Understandable. But you mentioned art. Yeah, we said briefly at the beginning of the Africa Day. So altogether, you are working at the Museum of African Art in Serbia in Belgrade.
Mhm.
So for our audience that don't know about this museum, and not only in Serbia, actually people in Serbia don't know about this museum, which is really sad. Could you tell
Mhm.
us a little bit more about it, where it is, the history about it, and what
Mhm.
people can see it there?
Okay, so the full name of the museum is the Museum of African Art, the Veda and Dr. Zdravko Pečar collection. So in
Hmm.
this subtitle of the museum, we can, discover the story about its origin and about museum history. The museum is in Belgrade, capital of Serbia today, but what is important, it was capital of Yugoslavia. So in 1977, Zdravko Pečar and his wife at that time, Veda Zagorac, they decided to make a gift for Belgrade and for Yugoslavia in general, and to actually give their collection to the city of Belgrade and to make a new legacy in the form of the museum. What is interesting, Zdravko Pečar, at that time, he was ambassador of Yugoslavia in Mali and Ghana. And as he said during that time, because of his wife Veda and because of her idea, they decided to make a museum. Actually, they decided to make a collection of African objects and African arts. They lived mostly on the west part of African continent for 20 years. But what is also important in this anti-colonial history, and when we speak about anti-colonial struggles and anti-colonialism in general, before their diplomatic mission and before this time when Zdravko Pečar was Yugoslav ambassador, actually they took participation in Algerian war for liberation during 60s and 50s. So they have a history and a relation with different parts of African continent, but shortly speaking, a museum actually is founded because they had opportunity to live in Mali and Ghana and to visit neighboring countries, and they created this very interesting collection almost half a century ago.
Wow.
Wow. And you collected some other pieces of art from that period onwards, and are they still present there?
Yes, of course. As I said, museum was founded in 1977. And what is most important, of course, it is its anti-colonial history, because as Zdravko Pečar and Veda Zagorac said, every object in our collection is actually entered Yugoslavia on a legal basis. So mostly we are speaking about presents for Zdravko Pečar as Yugoslav ambassador. We are speaking about bought objects and similar. So during this 46 years now, during the museum existence, actually we are keeping this heritage in a way that we have legacies all the time. Different families, people from Yugoslavia, people who had contact actually with African continent, they are still making these legacies to the museum. But of course, also there is this official part of museum acquisitions. So the collection is bigger than it was at the beginning in 1977. And today, actually, it keeps different objects, traditional African arts, but also contemporary art.
I noticed when you mentioned it was legally imported and bought. You want to, separate yourself from British museum and other museums of colonial powers and how they took their art, right?
Yeah, of course. That's the most important thing, actually. These internet memes, for example, when memes are dealing with museums, most examples actually are about British Museum and, jokes about, I don't know why we have still pyramids in Egypt, because they were too heavy to be transported to the British Museum. So the Museum of African Art in Belgrade has a completely different story, and this is something we are researching currently in this moment, and this is something we want to actually point out as a specific Yugoslav heritage. To have a museum of African art, which is museum of other cultures or very far away cultures, but this museum was founded and actually created in completely different, friendly, non-aligned mindset.
So it has a bigger story than its original name and what it represents. And people can easily go there whenever they want. Museum is open for public, right?
Yes, museum is open actually every day from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. But what is also interesting, I wanted to mention that these objects, initial objects from Zdravko Pečar and Veda Zagorac, they are mostly something which is in this moment recognized as the best of traditional African art. And actually, mostly these objects are not so, how to say, original. Most of them are, souvenirs or something. Even today, ambassadors and diplomats, they exchange, different cultural objects, some small gifts and something like that.
Like opanci from Pirot or something. I'm from Serbia, like shoes. Yeah, and people can put it in Serbia museum somewhere in the world. So
but
I can imagine,
it's symbolic in a way, all of these objects, but the idea to make a museum out of them is very interesting, because even if you look permanent exhibition of our museum, because permanent exhibition is the same all the time, and permanent exhibition presents this initial collection made by Zdravko Pečar and Veda Zagorac. So when we make analysis of that permanent exhibition, you can also read between the lines and see that maybe they had an idea to make more like some kind of cultural center or meeting point. They used these objects as a symbolic representation for a lot wider story, wider context actually, of non-aligned politics. And of course, museum archive shows that they had a lot of ideas for African artists to come to Belgrade, for Yugoslav artists to go to have, a real exchange actually between people.
And this exchange, did it happen often? Were people involved quite a lot from Africa and from Yugoslavia? How did it look like?
during first days of the museum, during the end of 70s and during 80s, it happened. And what is interesting, of course, this museum had, temporary exhibitions, and these exhibitions showed not traditional African objects, but contemporary art of that time, which is very progressive for that moment. But unfortunately, because of the breakup of Yugoslavia and wars we had in our country, and of course because of exchange role within non-aligned movement, everything stopped during 90s. And of course these are very complex situations. Actually, museum got back on the track, how to say, to have a real time communication recently, in past 10 years maybe. This kind of isolation lasted from 90s until early 2000.
Interesting that you mentioned this contemporary art was presented in the 70s and 80s in Belgrade, while at the other hand, the African countries were independent for like 10, 20 years tops. And unfortunately, a lot of them were not so literate or educated, but still, nevertheless, in such a short time, they managed to, evolve to this extent that have some contemporary art that's presentable. So probably Belgrade was really unique in the world in that sense of presenting this.
Yes, and actually, you in a way described one of the most interesting for me objects from permanent exhibition from our museum. It's an modernistic artwork, but by Yugoslav artist Nikola Kolja Milunović, and actually it's a map of Africa made of small parts of the wood, and it looks like some kind of pixelization of African continent, but it is placed within grid, very geometric, modernistic grid. And what is interesting about that map was actually there for the museum opening. So it was made in 1977. But when you look on this pixelization, actually people are thinking about nature on the African continent, but actually these are state borders. And it is interesting because he made state borders in 1977, but as you said, a lot of African countries actually were colonies at that time. So we understand that artwork as an official sign of Yugoslav politics at that time and non-aligned movement, because they approved that state borders.
So even those and I'm guessing some of them got independence later on.
Yes, for example, Namibia got independence in 1990, for example. But when you see map of Africa, which is placed actually directly at the entrance of the museum, so the first thing you see when you enter the Museum of African Art, you see that map, and it is very symbolic map because these straight lines and geometric grid is in a way a symbol of this scramble for Africa, these borders which were made in a geometric way, but pixelization is actually directly related to state borders.
So you want to say they although it was made before the independence of Namibia, it was still showing the borders of Namibia, right?
Yes. And that is a sign of Yugoslav politics, actually, and the position of Yugoslavia in non-aligned movement and related to the questions of anti-colonial struggles and liberation of African countries. And it is one of the main signs, within our museum and permanent exhibition, because when you enter permanent exhibition, you see something similar you can see on the West in British Museum or in Cape Branly. You see traditional African objects in a museum context with postaments, okay, with specific design in green and blue colors. It is a very specific Yugoslav design, very important, but still they are, how to say, silent museum objects, which are traditional African objects in one part of Europe, but very specific part of Europe. And then they have communication or connection with just a few objects. And one of them is this map by Nikola Kolja Milunovic, which shows completely different contexts. You know, it's ambivalent in a way.
I see what you want to say. I mean, when you compare this museum with the museums of the West, specifically those countries that were previously colonial powers, when you see African art there and history, they represent it by itself. Like you see it, it's beautiful. They talk about some backstory and that's it. But here it has a storyline. It shows about the struggle against those powers, while as powers don't mention about any colonial struggle. They just mention, oh, we were there. We have this really amazing art from those countries, and no question about it, about the backstory of it or whatsoever.
Yes, of course. And as I said, this museum is very specific. Maybe it is not so, clear at the first look that we are speaking about non-aligned collection. I mean, it's also very complicated to speak when we have collections and when you are collecting something. You are taking it also. It is yours in a way when you make a collection. But how to deal with collection which was made to be friendly and to be signed for something else. So this museum has, of course, all of these stories in its history. And today we are doing research and we are trying to, make projects, exhibitions, to work in accordance with this specific heritage.
Mm-hmm. And could you mention a few exhibitions that you organized and what are they showing?
Well, for example, I had the opportunity to participate in a project called Reflect. And Reflect is some kind of platform for presenting contemporary African art today. And it was very important for the Museum of African Art to start again to make exhibitions dedicated to the contemporary art. And of course, I already mentioned Namibia, but for example, the first Reflect exhibition was dedicated to 30 years after Namibian independence. So it was very interesting experience because it was an open call. In the National Gallery of Namibia, they had open call for artists to make artworks dedicated to the question of 30 years of Namibian independence. And then artists, they gave, very different, very critical views on this subject. And we had opportunity to host that exhibition also in Belgrade. It was very refreshing to see, in real time, some critique or some opinions or some events. The other Reflect exhibition was organized last year, and it was in collaboration with gallery called This Is Not a White Cube from Luanda, from Angola. And then also we had the opportunity to see artistic scene in Angola and to compare it with nowadays Belgrade scene and to see what are, medium subjects, the most important things, the most important issues. And actually we could compare, situations in culture, in politics, in history. It is very, very specific dialogue within museum context.
I can imagine. And the artists, I'm presuming they're all mixed, both from Serbia and both from Angola in this case, and previously from Namibia, or?
No, just Namibian in first case,
Okay.
and just Angola's in other case. But what is important for the museum, but also for the museum public, which is of course international, but mostly public is Serbian here in Belgrade, is that we could see in real time through artistic interventions actually what are situations in real time here and there.
I see. And this museum, are there any other similar museums in the area of ex-Yugoslavia, or is it a single one, unfortunately?
It is the only one. It is unique museum, but there are collections, and we are also in dialogue. How to say? For example, in Podgorica, there is very interesting collection because they had gallery of non-aligned movement, and also they could track in real time contemporary art of that time. And what is interesting, for example, for that collection, but also for our collection, and I believe for all African or similar collections in Yugoslav region, is that during 90s and after the war they got marginalized. They are actually forgotten in a way. So now we are in period when we are doing re-examination. We are discovering again and again all of these collections, and we are making comparisons and everything.
Oh, that's always good. Good thing to have a dialogue and connections. Are you also having connections with, as you mentioned before, Angola and Namibia? Are you still having connections with other African countries and exchanging ideas about potential projects or something?
Of course, in last few years, the museum is doing this a lot, and it is great actually for the museum, but also for all of us living here. It is not easy to make cultural exchange and collaboration in these parts of the world. Very specific parts of the world are Namibia, for example, Angola and Serbia. But we are giving our best. So, for example, when we speak about these Reflect exhibitions, we even had the opportunity to go and to visit Windhoek in Namibia and Luanda in Angola. And what was also the best, when we had the exhibition opening last year, we had guests from Angola, and 2 artists came, and then they had in our museum their own guided tour through the exhibition, and it was the best practice because it's not so how to say, it's not so cool, but actually it's not so, it is not okay to speak as a white curator in this part of the world about somebody else and his or hers art. So we had this great opportunity to hear from them actually about their art, and it was very visited event, very very interesting to see and to hear.
That's a really amazing thing to hear. And the connection is there in the region, as you mentioned. The connection is there with Africa. Not many people in the Balkans, especially not in the world, know that we in Serbia, in Belgrade, have a relatively strong African community present today. Are you connected with them? Do you know? Can you tell us also the backstory of African community in Belgrade nowadays?
Yeah, of course. Mostly these are students, and they have, as I know, official association called C-Vision. We are in communication with them. We had collaboration. They made some educational and creative workshops. They are participating always in this event. We have the biggest event of our museum is Afro Festival, and it is always in June. During the end of June. I think this year it will be 24th and 25th.
We're inviting all of our audience to come and visit and check it out.
Yes, but as I mentioned, students and this African Association, and of course all of the African embassies in Belgrade, which are present in Belgrade, they are also participating. So we have that kind of collaboration. But what is also interesting within museum programs, we had Swahili language workshops. So one of the students who knows, of course, our language, but is native a speaker of Swahili, he actually gave lectures, and it was very interesting, because a lot of people came, they learned Swahili as they learn any other foreign language. But as I remember, one year they went to Tanzania together, all of these
Oh,
participators,
wow.
and they wanted, to try to speak their Swahili.
Mm.
So we have that kind of collaborations. One of the students, for example, he participated in making of our audio guide through permanent exhibition. And if you enter our museum and if you understand French, you will hear French, but French which is spoken in Mali, because this student, he is from Mali,
Oh.
and we wanted to make this kind of collaboration and to have, because a lot of objects from the permanent exhibition are actually from Mali.
Interesting. So he's saying in his, so to say, Mali French Creole, for people to understand that come from this region.
Yes, and
Yeah,
our
nice.
audio guide is, when we speak about French, is made in that way.
Hmm. I mean, you mentioned Swahili. For our audience to know, it's a language that is mostly used in Tanzania, to some extent Kenya, Malawi. It's,
East Africa mostly, in
yeah,
East Africa. Mhm.
I would say the most useful language from all of the African languages to learn, because you can use it in different areas, and plus you can connect to Arabic, to Fusca, to some extent, because it
Mhm.
has these roots. And you mentioned that one of the students, I don't know who is today, but one of my close friends was before teacher or was helping, Amosi Peter. I don't know if you know him.
Yes, of
So
course. Amosi was the
yeah.
first one, but later we got a collaboration with Benjamin Chemarum, and because students, they are finishing their studies and then
Mm,
they have something else. But we are happy to make collaboration with just native Swahili speaker,
mm,
and to organize this, which is also very interesting experience for the
mm.
museum.
Yes, for sure it is. Anna, do you have some questions regarding museum?
I want to ask about this visit of on the Tanzania. Were you involved in that organization as a museum, or it
No,
was something? Do you plan any organizations like that?
no. When we speak about Tanzania, I just mentioned that actually it was individual.
Mm-hmm.
People who participated in that language workshop, they just friendly decided to go and to try to speak and to see. But official museum visits actually were to Namibia and to Angola. And I had the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to be part of that team, because the idea was, of course, to have direct contact with artists there and with curators, colleagues. So it was really, I don't know, unique experience in a way. I mean, it changed my life. I could say that for sure.
Could you also share your impression as a person from Serbia, from the Balkans, visiting those countries? How was it in general? What was the most unusual thing to see there?
Yeah, well, actually, what is important to say, Namibia and Angola, they are neighboring countries, but they are completely different, which is, I mean, it's not strange, because they have different histories. I already said Namibia is one of the last African colonies, actually got independence in 1990, but still today you can feel some kind of apartheid or consequences of apartheid.
Uh-huh.
You could feel it in the air, how to say. And I had the opportunity to see striking moments when we speak about architecture, about the urbanism of the city of Windhoek, which is capital of Namibia, because, for example, during apartheid, they made this part called Katutura, and actually it was how to say, ghetto for black people, and the most part of the city. And even today, when you analyze Namibian economics and politics, most of the country is actually owned by white people, even though you have a lot more of black people actually living in Namibia. So Namibia is very, very specific country. But when we speak about neighboring Angola, and of course my experience is very, it was short time, and I just had opportunity to see capital cities and to speak with my colleagues, mostly artistic circles. But Angolan situation is completely different. And I mentioned architecture and urbanism in Windhoek, in Namibia. When we speak about Angola and Luanda, it's completely different. You could see, for example, old Portugal villas, and then new skyscrapers and these business buildings. But besides them, of course, in the city there are these neighborhoods called Museke, and Museke are some kind of favelas. It's a Portuguese word for favela. So everything is mixed in Luanda, for example. And it was very interesting because one of the artworks presented in Belgrade later on our exhibition actually had this subject of these buildings and urbanism, which is very similar to Belgrade waterfront. Very similar, very similar situation. One
In
artist
Angola.
in Angola, in Luanda, yes.
Okay.
But Luanda is, of course, a bigger city, and
Obviously.
these buildings are more bigger than Belgrade waterfront. So, for example, this artist, he made a statement because he's making recycling art, and because he had studio in one part of the city, and then they decided to destroy this part of the city because they wanted these skyscrapers.
Sounds familiar, like in Belgrade with Savamala.
Yes, of course. And when we had this artwork in Belgrade, and when we had guided tours, everybody said, yes, we understand, it's the same situation. So we recognized common things, common problems, which are not related just, how to say, in general, to capitalism and to the moment we are living, but they have connections also with our position on the global map.
True. We can easily go into other subtopic of today's, because you mentioned, and we mentioned it more than once, about the non-alignment movement and what it was and what it is today, and why are we so much similar to each other, more that we would realize it. Could you tell us about what is non-alignment movement and why was it so important for Yugoslavia back then?
Of course, I mentioned non-aligned movement during this story, but it was movement which was founded actually in Belgrade in a way. If we speak about the first conference of non-aligned movement, it was organized here in Belgrade in 1961. So the Belgrade was host of that first conference of non-aligned movement. And what is also interesting, Belgrade was host of 9th conference of non-aligned movement in 1989. And for our museum, it is very interesting story because our museum building, the building of the Museum of African Art, is one of the rare museum buildings in Belgrade, because mostly, maybe you know this story, we have museums just placed in some buildings which were made and projected to be something else. And that's why we have problems with museum buildings mostly. But for example, Museum of African Art was projected and built to be a museum of African art, and in 1989 they decided to make adaptation of our building and of the museum, and they built a dome huge dome, and the plan was to make a 9th conference of non-aligned movement within museum dome. But because we are speaking about 1989 and we are speaking about some years which are called also Afro-pessimism, but when we speak about Yugoslavia, they are definitely years when we had problems in a different for different reasons, so they didn't finish this dome, and even today this dome is not finished. It is used, and actually we will finish it in next few or more years. But I started about non-aligned movement. This is
No, it's
just
connected. Yeah, it's connected.
this is just fun fact. I mean that museum was part of that 9th conference of non-aligned movement. But of course, even today in Belgrade, there are a lot of signs in the city. I don't know if you are familiar with this story, but a lot of murals in the city, a lot of city markers are directly related to non-aligned movement, and these events happened in Belgrade, mostly such as, for example, on Brankov Bridge, we have huge monument which is called non-aligned obelisk. Actually, it is monument dedicated to the non-aligned movement.
On the old cities side, not on New Belgrade side, but
Yes.
okay.
Yes. But it is even visible in Knez Mihailova Street and Knez Mihailova Street and Terazije. They have a lot of murals. And these murals were, for example, for the 9th conference of non-aligned movement, they were official presence of Yugoslav republics to Belgrade because of the 9th conference of non-aligned movement. But all of these monuments, they are they exist, they are there, but they don't have any signs. If you visit Belgrade, you would not know actually that. And this is part of this treatment of Yugoslav and actually non-aligned history.
Sorry, to add, also in Ušće, so near the delta of Sava and Danube River, in this Ušće Park there, you can also, I noticed by chance, by bypassing some part of the park, some stone marbles on the ground, and I noticed names. Then I saw Nasser, then I said Nehru, then I think I saw also Che Guevara. I was like, what are those names? And I guess they're from 1961, the conference that was also had to commemorate. So every tree, I guess, was planted with the name of this specific guest. The tree doesn't exist, or some of them exist, but the stones are still there. It was an amazing discovery for me. And nobody told me about this. Nobody knows about this. It's just lying there.
Yes, it's Park of Friendship, the official name, Park of Friendship, and it was founded also for the first conference of non-aligned movement in 1961. Actually, that was also opportunity when they opened Siv, or Palace of Serbia today, but you know, this building near Park of Friendship. So they opened that building for the first conference of non-aligned movement. And for me, it was interesting to find out that non-aligned movement decided to use, you know, trees, nature as a monument. And it is a good idea, because even those monuments made of I don't know, stone or other materials, in a way they wanted that monuments to be, you know, temporary, because they had idea to transport them in other cities when they have other conferences during time, and trees are something untransportable, how to say. So maybe they wanted to use trees. But yes, Park of Friendship is very important and a famous monument to non-aligned movement. But even streets names, you know, we have still Agostino Neto Street, but for example, we had Haile Selassie Street. But
student dormitory, for instance, in Zvezdara, Patrice Lumumba. Yeah, he was from Congo.
Yes,
Yeah,
and when he was killed, when he was murdered in Belgrade, they had huge protests, and even I don't know, BBC or some famous West media, they wrote in Belgrade they destroyed the embassy of Belgium because of the Lumumba protest. It was very tough and very famous protest. And even about this subject, for example, our museum had an exhibition, because we are trying, to follow not just contemporary art, but also to make a research about this archival and historical events, because all of them, they are, as you said, for the Park of Friendship, they are forgotten or just marginalized.
yeah, it's really sad to hear this, especially when people don't know much about it, and they should know, and it's still present in our everyday lives. You can see it to some extent, and for our audience to understand better, some of us never heard about non-alignment movement before. Why was it created? What it represented?
Yeah, I started to speak about that,
No, it's
but
okay. Just to make it concise, it's okay.
yeah.
That's why
So,
we're here.
official story about the Yugoslav history. Of course, Yugoslavia was a socialist country, and it was created, how to say, because we won victory over Nazi Germany during the Second World War. And then during this creation of very specific model of Yugoslav socialism, and this moment when Tito said no to Stalin, actually Yugoslavia got in this different and very specific or so-called third way. In a sense, together with Yugoslavia or Yugoslav President Tito, Nehru and Nasser, they had this foundational meeting, and then they decided to create a third way of global politics. Not to be, how to say, with first bloc or America or second bloc Russia, but to
Capitalist
make,
and communist, so they're in between.
yeah, to make a third way. And because of that, because of a great collaboration with African countries, because all of them, they were part of non-aligned movement, today we have this kind of heritage, and at the end our museum of African art.
True. I remember one situation in my life. I don't know where I was. I think it was gym, and one guy was from Ghana. It was in Germany, and I said, "Oh, Ghana! I know where Ghana is, and I know that she was." Besides Nehru was for Egypt, and Nasser. No, Nasser was for Egypt. Nehru was for India, and Tito for Yugoslavia. There were two more, so to say, pillars. One guy was from Ghana, and the other one was from Indonesia. Suharto, or I guess
Sukarno from
Sukarno.
Indonesia
Yeah,
and Nkrumah from Ghana. Kwame
exactly.
Nkrumah.
He was really tough one to pronounce. I said, yeah, there was one guy who was also a pillar. He said, yeah, of course. I mean, it was strange for them that we know, because from their side, most of Africans, I also met from Nigeria, from Cameroon, they know about Yugoslavia, they know about current countries, they know about our connections before, which is, again, really unfortunate from our side, because we don't know much. I can say from my generation, from your generation as well, not so many people know this. And by approaching him and telling that they know what his country was stood for and what his country contributed to this non-alignment movement, he was amazed and really happy for this. Sadly, it's not the case so often. Yeah.
Yes, we had also experience. I mentioned these visits to Namibia and Angola, and the most common thing there was, when we say we are from Serbia, nobody knew. But when we say we are from Yugoslavia, everybody knew, actually, or Belgrade maybe. And
30 years after, and yeah, they can easily
yeah,
remember. Yep. Mhm.
and even in Luanda, in Angola, even today, there is a street called Marshal Tito Presidente. So we visited that street. But of course, in Belgrade, we have Agostino Neto Street, because Agostino Neto was Angolan, the first president of independent Angola. So there are connections, mostly, okay, older people, older generations, they know. And here, mostly people are remembering, some friend from school or from during studies, or because Belgrade was a host for these students from non-aligned countries.
True. As I remember, throughout the whole communist period of Yugoslavia, there were a lot of people not from Africa, but also from Asia, from Bolivia, from those non-aligned countries. They're not only from Africa, and they all came to different parts of Yugoslavia, and some of them stayed to up until they have children, got so fluent in the local languages. Like in Croatia, there's like one late night show was before, and there was one black guy. I think he was from Sudan, and he spoke Croatian, and he was pretending to be from Herzegovina and something like this. It was really fun to see this, and which was and lots of people afterwards in the 90s afterwards this program was stopped because of the wars and the dissolvement of Yugoslavia. But in 2011 something changed, right?
Well, yes, if you mean on this exchange today, right?
Yes,
When we
yes,
speak
yes.
about students,
Students.
yeah, there is association World in Serbia. World in Serbia, it is called, and mostly students are coming today, mostly in Belgrade, as I know, and they have also a band called Avalski Put,
Okay.
way, Avala way, or so
Could you explain
they,
why it's called like this?
because they are learning Serbian in one campus in Avala.
It's near Belgrade, right?
It's near Belgrade, and it's their meeting point, or maybe something, a place where they are starting to meet Serbians or Serbia or everything.
Oh yeah. As I remember, they stay there for 1 year. They learn Serbian, and then they study in universities in Serbian language, which is insane. Coming from Africa, learning Serbian, have to study in Serbian for at least 4 years.
Yes, but mostly, they are coming to our museum, and of course, we are in communication. But what was interesting in Angola, for example, unfortunately, I cannot speak Portuguese, but Portuguese is official language in Angola, and then we had to use, Google Translate and to find our way. And we were in, we had to see some movie in Luanda, and then of course we did not understand anything because it was in Portuguese. And then we started to speak our language, between ourselves, my colleague and I. And then we just heard somebody, hey, sorry, I understand your language. I studied in Belgrade for 4 years. And then we had this, situation to be understood in Serbian, even in Luanda, Angola. And he spoke very well, of course.
He studied before in Yugoslavia period, or
No, recently.
Recently.
Yeah, a few years ago. But he came back in Luanda to work because he finished studies.
I heard so many stories like this. I don't know, like during the Syrian civil war, some of our doctor, was it, or I don't know, I think he was a reporter. He went there to Syria, and it was in some hospital, and some guy heard him and started speaking in Croatian, Serbian. So I studied in Zagreb or somewhere, and then he just spoke like during Yugoslavia period. I also heard during Yugoslav period in the movies, on it, in our audience, this was like big thing in Yugoslavia. But there was like one black guy appearing in a couple of Yugoslav films, and my mother came to me and she said, yeah, he was studying, I think, mechanical engineering or something, or she knew him. She knew him from parties or late night student parties. So like, yeah, he was already known in Belgrade. So, and he was like being an actor in some in parallel studying. Amazing. And you
he
said
was
this
popular.
yeah, exactly. And you mentioned this modern, so to say, these 21st century students that came here to Serbia and went back. I know one case, since we mentioned for Tanzania, our dear friend
Amosi.
Peter Amosi, exactly. He was, I think, in Tanganyika, or no, Tanganyika is actually the continental part of Tanzania. He was in Zanzibar. And then our famous, really old artist, fashion artist, I think Olivera Rakočević or something like this. Yeah, she was there with her 35 years younger husband or something like this. Yeah, quite a lot, but not to digress. And he heard actually some guy next to him, some local Tanzanian guy, told him, "Hey, this woman here, she came from Serbia and stuff. Like, you can approach her and tell her something." And on it, I need to tell you, he's really fluent in Serbian. And then he approached. Imagine you're like a really old, famous fashion artist from Serbia going for a summer vacation in Zanzibar, and some local African guy approaches and says, "Hey, how are you in your native tongue? What are you doing?" Like, what? Just talking about any topic at all is like insane story. Yeah,
But nothing is impossible.
exactly. Nothing is impossible, as you said. And this 21st century, so to say, African students, they are. Do you know how big community it is in Serbia, in Belgrade today?
I don't know exact number. Few years ago somebody mentioned, but I could not be sure if we are speaking about 200 or something like that
Mm-hmm.
students. But of course, part of African community are also embassies and embassy staff and all people employed in embassies. Museum is a meeting point for them in a way, of
That's
course,
nice.
especially during this Afro Festival, where I don't know if you visited Afro Festival maybe during some
Unfortunately
years.
not, but I will definitely do it in
Yeah,
the
but
future.
it is very popular event and opportunity, of course, not just to learn about the museum, its exhibitions, guided tours, lectures, and similar, but also to enjoy in a really huge museum garden, because we have a huge garden, and to find out more about African countries, because embassies, they are bringing, food and drinks and specific something which is specific for their country, so you can also taste something, I don't know, a tea from Morocco, or some cookies from Algeria and similar. And of course we are always trying to have some collaboration with some band, or some performing artists, or anything we can organize actually in that moment.
Although it's like festival and exhibition at the same time, it sounds like a really cool party that I would love to attend, to be honest. So
Yes,
definitely
yes.
it would
It's
be.
very relaxing event, because always we have music. Always there is option to just relax and enjoy in museum garden, or to
Mhm.
play a game, because we have also this Mancala game, which is related to different parts of African continent, but mostly we are practicing a way of playing in West Africa. So, for example, it is also part of Afro Festival, but of course, this official part, guided tours, lectures, exhibitions, everything. It's very popular event for the museum.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, you mentioned like how many are today present in Belgrade, in terms of African community, not only students but also representatives from the embassies, maybe companies, and so on. Could you tell us how does today's non-alignment movement, how does it look like, and what does it represent?
Mm. We had opportunity to celebrate 60 years of non-aligned movement 2 years ago, so in 2021. But since our civil wars and since the disintegration of Yugoslavia, we are not members of non-aligned
That's a
movement.
sad, tragic thing to hear. Yeah, ironic that we are not part of this movement anymore.
Yeah, well, because one of the most important rules or principles of non-aligned movement is actually peaceful coexistence between countries and between peoples. And of course, civil wars in Yugoslavia were everything than peaceful
Yeah, we
coexistence.
failed miserably. Yeah.
Yeah, so we are just we are outside of the, we are external members, how to say, or
Observers.
observers, yes, observers. But if you follow the news, Belgrade was a host of this commemorative conference 2 years ago, and again non-aligned countries were here in Belgrade. But in my opinion, I'm not sure what was the exact political position, and actually what was the role of Serbia today in that event. So in that moment, for example, in the city, we could see, of course, a lot of flags. We saw in the news that at Belgrade Fair, Sajam, they had some meetings and events. But what is interesting, in our museum, we did not have an official visit. We had just visits from delegation from Botswana and from South African Republic. So just two of them visited, for example, museum. But of course, Serbia official conference was visited more. So today, I don't know the strength. I actually don't see the strength of the non-aligned movement today.
Yeah, you said 2 years ago, and you mentioned the flags on the poles. I remember doing the quiz with my friends, like, "Hey, I will guess this flag, and you tell me if I'm right or not." It was like a lot of flags, different flags. I think you are right. There's not a big power to this movement to nowadays, especially after the dissolvement of Soviet Union, because the real strength was to be like balancing power between the West and the East, the communist and the capitalist side, not to be aligned to any side. That's where it got the name from. And once the need to be separate, did not appear again. They simply lost their strength, and now they're mostly representative, promoting the culture, I guess, and trade. So yeah. So I'm also curious about the future of this movement. What will it represent? And you said we are observers, Serbia, and as I also read, most of ex-Yugoslav countries. But fun fact: Bosnia and Herzegovina and North Macedonia were rejected to become members. Do you know what the reason? Why was it?
No, I don't know about this, but I can make a research. But I suppose because even though the movement was founded in Yugoslavia and in Belgrade, actually violation of one of the most important principles, which is peace and peaceful coexistence. I mean, it is not acceptable, how to say, to behave in that way and to have that kind of historical heritage. I mean, it's not so strange. But for Bosnia and North Macedonia, I will have to check what is it about. I'm not sure.
Makes sense. But although I think it's also a bit cynical, since some of the African members have also fought each other and they're still part of the non-alignment movement. So no, who knows? And it's also interesting fact that today in Europe, it's only Belarus is part of this non-alignment movement and nobody else, a full-time member. And during the Yugoslav period, Yugoslavia was also not alone back then. Malta and Cyprus, if you consider them Europe, were also part of non-alignment movement.
Yes, and when you look at these photos, and famous photo of the first conference here in Belgrade, this guy from Cyprus, he's always recognizable because of this hat.
He was a priest, he was Orthodox priest, and he was always in full uniform, so to say. Yeah, amazing picture. We're going to share it with our guests that can see it on video. The picture of it's basically like a costume party, so to say, because some of them wear the traditional clothes. And for instance, Gaddafi was very famous for coming to Belgrade, and not only Belgrade, around the world, coming with camels and with tents. He never stayed in a hotel, never. I got him. His crew made tents where he can be inside and had his camels, and he gave to Belgrade Zoo, I guess, a couple of camels as a gift.
Yes, I read that somewhere.
He was always like a show off and always like a drama queen and stuff.
But it is very exciting, to research and to see all of these photos and to read about the first conference of non-aligned movement, because it was a great event. It is striking when you see, for example, these journalists and how they transmitted this and broadcasted actually for TV stations, because you can see some, I don't know, cyber Yugoslavia in a way, in the big buildings and halls, and a lot of these machines for broadcasting and everything. And what is also interesting these days and in this period, Mila Turelic, famous filmmaker, she made a movie about non-aligned movement, and for the first time, because she connected audio voice with this silent records of the first conference of non-aligned movement. So, for example, this is one of the newest movies you could see here in Belgrade, but also she is traveling all over the world. I saw that she was in Algeria, but also in Paris, in different countries. So, and for example, that movie is very good introduction to non-aligned movement today from that perspective.
And she was not alone. A lot of artists, and not only artists, but film workers, photographers, you name it, were also during the Yugoslav period, were traveling really often to non-aligned countries, especially in Africa, and filming lots of stuff there, especially following Tito on his journeys. And yeah, you mentioned like Algerian War, and I also saw this documentary about Tito's official filmmaker that he was filming
Stevan
him.
Labudovic.
Stevan Labudovic, yes, exactly.
And that's the movie by
Yeah.
Mila Turelic. It's the same, but she has diptych, 2 movies. One is
okay.
about the conference and this connection between audio, voice, and silent records and movies. But the other one is about Stevan Labudovic. And what is also interesting, of course, Stevan Labudovic was a cameraman, and he was employed to follow Tito during journeys. But Zdravko Pečar, the founder of our museum, he was a journalist, and actually he went to Egypt, but also to Algeria as a journalist. And a lot of photographs, he made a lot of photographs during Algerian War for Independence also. A lot of Yugoslav experts, filmmakers, journalists, doctors, Red Cross also, Red Cross volunteers. They all got involved, especially when we speak about Algerian War.
And for our audience to understand, they were promoting the independence movement, as you said at the beginning, so anti-colonial strife on the side of the Algerians, and not on the side of French people, of course. And as you mentioned, Stevan Labudovic, he was making those materials to promote the anti-propaganda or propaganda for the other side, depending who you ask, about this movement, and not for the French side.
Yes, and it was the main thing, how to say, for Yugoslavia to have its own position and to actually say on which side is Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was definitely on Algerian side. And about this subject also we had a few exhibitions. One of them we called "This is not a war," and we made this title on purpose. This is not a war because, as you said, Labudovic made this anti-propaganda or different propaganda movies. French people or French government at that time, they spoke just about, event or incident or something.
Like in present day, sorry to digress, special military operation, as somebody would call it, something happening in Ukraine. Yeah, sounds familiar.
Yes.
It was 60 years ago, more than, insane.
Yeah, so we made this exhibition, and of course we want to refer also on contemporary moment and times we are living now, but Zdravko Pečar and Veda Zagorac also, because she wrote for Vjesnik and for different Yugoslav newspapers. They all made this, how to say, propaganda machine. They wanted to show the Algerian reality at that time, and the main purpose was to to destroy this French illusion of pacification, of events, of military operation or whatever. So it was very concrete and very, very engaged, actually, Yugoslav role in Algerian war.
Yeah, the French side were trying to, as you said, to pacify things, to say that it's not so important. It's not movement for independence. It's just some terrorists, which was not the case. And Yugoslav side was for the side of the truth, and that's why they were so much involved into this conflict in that sense. Not militarily speaking, but in sense of giving the word out to the nation, out to the world.
Yeah, and they understood each other, between themselves, because even Algerians and even Yugoslav actually testimonies are they could relate because of partisan experience from Yugoslavia, from the Second World War. So even some, military tactics or guerrilla tactics were used or compared between.
It was just 15, 20 years before, so not still relatively fresh, so they can exchange some ideas. Interesting.
Yes. And about this subject, if you like movies, because as I said, I like movies, but one of the striking movies is Battle of Algiers. And it's a movie which was made in 1966, which is just 4 years after the war and after the independence. And in that movie, one of the characters is actually Yasef Sadi, and he was he is a revolutionarist from Algeria, and he was part of the war, but he is in the movie, he's acting himself, actually. And that movie was also helped by Yugoslavia to be made. So that's some recommendation.
And it's amazing how, even as you said before, and now that they still remember Yugoslavia, they still remember what was done in their name. And not just in the sense of newspaper, but and movie making, but also in the sense of going there, having our ambassadors there, having our news outlets. Also, lots of companies were present there. Yugoslav companies built a lot of buildings. You mentioned architecture, a lot of things in Zimbabwe, in you name it, in Zambia, wherever, are built by Yugoslav people and Yugoslav architects.
Yes, it was collaboration with Energo project mostly. But also other companies, for example, there is also this car company for cars, Zastava, and there is this famous story, Kragujevac Kilimanjaro. Actually, it was some kind of test for Zastava car to go from Kragujevac to Kilimanjaro. And there are documentaries about that also, where people are interviewing people on the streets in Egypt, and they are saying, oh, yes, I remember Yugoslavia. I know Yugoslavia because of Tito and because of Zastava. So it was also industry in a way, and they had, this exchange.
It was sort of Top Gear from that time, like to see how this car will manage to, if it will manage to reach Kilimanjaro from Kragujevac in Yugoslavia and Serbia back then.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember there are some really cool photos, and I think I saw a few clips about the whole journey. And
Yes, they made some commemorative event, and they have a new book about that, and a documentary which was on TV here in Serbia with protagonists. They remember actually the whole event, so they had that. In Museum of Yugoslavia, for example, a few years ago, they organized exhibition Tito in Africa. So they followed Tito during his journey through African continent, and then, a lot of photographs, newspaper articles, a lot of these testimonies about that history, because, as you mentioned, it is necessary to speak about this history because it is unknown in a way, or it is invisible in a way. It is invisible in common sense.
Exactly, it's invisible. Although some of the things like monuments and some things that were built are still present, you can see them by your own eyes. But the connection between people, you already mentioned a few of them. When you go to those countries, when you talk to them, you kind of have this sense of understanding of what they went through. Of even to now today, even although they don't know where Serbia is, where Croatia is, where Bosnia is, they know Yugoslavia and know the people. And just sharing our burdens, sharing our bad things, good things, we can understand each other. Some people say because we are both poor in some sense, and then we can understand each other. Maybe, I don't know, but I guess this 50 years of connection has still some roots in us. And I can see when people visit us and we say non-alignment movement to some African people, they say, "Oh, you remember," and they really are happy. And it's just a unique thing. Just this understanding of person from Vietnam, from Bolivia, from Angola, and from Macedonia, all talking about the same thing, all understanding each other. It doesn't need to be music, it doesn't need to be politics, it's just regular everyday things. The connection is still present, and it's really a waste of not nurturing this and evolving more and more. It's just a waste of time, and lost opportunity, you may say.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I mean the museum is trying to make these things more visible, to be more common actually in education, in everyday life, or just between people.
Yeah, I agree. And you, as I understand, and I know from your biography, you're trying this in a modern way. So a little bit to go to some different topic to develop this type of, so to say, digital museum, cyberspace museum, whatsoever. What are you actually doing in this area? If you can share this with our audience.
Of course. Well, related to this subject of non-aligned movement, I participated in making this online map, which is called Nesvrstani.rs. Nesvrstani is our word for non-aligned movement. So Nesvrstani.rs is a website where we are trying to create we are trying to map actually non-aligned marks, not just in Belgrade, but all over the non-aligned world. It is a participating map. So, for example, some people from Ghana, from Zambia, but also from Croatia and Montenegro, they sent us just some, non-aligned monuments or marks to map there, and we did mapping in Belgrade, and mostly through this podcast I mentioned some of them, but actually when you go deep inside you realize that we have a lot of these marks, but they are not so if you don't know that this is related to non-aligned movement, then you will not see it, but you have to have this information because it is not placed in public space in that sense. So
You should have some writing explanation what does it represent, and you're trying this in the digital form to map everything. You know where to look for it, and
yes, of course. Now, you mentioned North Macedonia a few times. For example, in Belgrade, we have in Knez Mihajlova main street mosaic from North Macedonia from 1989, which was a present for Belgrade because of the 9th Conference of Non-Aligned Movement. But today...
Sorry, is it near Palatal, Albania, at the beginning of Knez Mihajlova or later on?
Later on, in the middle of the street, but
Montenegro embassy, so to say, that building, that right?
No, this is just a mosaic,
Yeah.
but if you want to see that mosaic was in public space in that time, but today it is entrance to Belgrade Art Hotel. But that entrance is made, actually the entrance destroyed a mosaic. They cut that mosaic, in half because why?
Because they want it.
Because they can.
Because cha-ching, cash. And I understand.
So that's why we are mapping online, and we are trying to do the. I mean, you know how online things are going, and when you have these mapping projects on the West, for example, everything happens very quickly. Databases are enormous, huge, and everything. But because we are working in non-aligned world, we decided to make this map in really slow way, with a few informations, but to make these informations, to save actually these informations in a cyberspace or in a cyber way. But it will be, we will map this, I believe, forever, because we cannot finish this map because communication is slow. We don't want to make some pressure about it, but on the other hand, we want to find out more about other non-aligned marks in different parts of the world.
But I find the idea fascinating. So you can like see the whole world, and you see on Angola some signs. You click on it, you zoom in, and you see some monument, some street name after this and this Yugoslav person, or some other non-aligned country. And you go back to Yugoslavia, and then you check other places. So you see all the symbols around the globe connected with each other. It's really cool idea. I love it.
Yeah, thank you. I love it also. I hope we will do something. I mean, that we will make progress with this map, because now we have just few countries, but we will continue to work on this mapping. This is also a very important question. I don't know if you are familiar with the issues of the internet in Africa in general, but here's one story. When we were in Luanda, Angola, in our hotel where we had Wi-Fi, everything was, the same, like here or there or anywhere in online world. But during our walks on the streets, we have small Unitel modems. These are models you can buy, for your mobile, and it's similar, like, I don't know, SIM card or something like that, but this is internet. And what was interesting, we paid these modems, a lot. I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 euros for 2 weeks. So it was not cheap.
But Luanda is also expensive, as I heard. One of the most expensive cities in the world. It was a shocking
it was the most expensive between 2010 and 2015, because they have a lot of oil, so a lot of investments. They have also this exclava called Cabinda, and Cabinda is the biggest resource of oil in Angola, but they had economic and investment crash after 2015, so they are in stagnation in a way. And because of this, Luanda is full of empty skyscrapers, empty glass skyscrapers. But what I wanted to say, yes, Unitel, and then we used internet, and when I wanted to send some pictures here or some files, I don't know, the phone was asking me, okay, do you want to pay? We can proceed. Do you want to pay? And then I said, but I paid already. I don't want to pay. I just want to send, these pictures and everything. And then this was interesting for me. Why should I pay when I already paid? What is it about? And then I, of course, made a research, and then I found out about Free Basics. I don't know if you read about this, mostly Facebook's project, but Free Basics is something which was rejected, for example, in India. But then they started with this project in African countries, a lot of African countries, and Angola is one of them. And they have this agreement with Unitel, but also with other, corporations and local telecommunication associations and organizations. And the point is that you have free internet, but actually you have free internet just for, I don't know, textual part for Wikipedia, or just textual part for Facebook. And it's some kind of polygon for Facebook to develop a market, to expand actually market.
To
And then I
promote,
read,
like, yeah, you want more? Here's a sneak peek. You want more? Pay more. Yeah.
yes, but actually it's very unequal position, because in Serbia we have, different internet, and even when we had like this, we are now in good connection and we can hear each other. But for example, museum wanted to have a series of this kind of podcast or talks with colleagues and artists and similar, but this bandwidth is very low because of cables infrastructure, this thing with free basics and everything. So we had a lot of problems, connection all the time was lost, everything was a problem. So we are very unequal in this digital world. So this map is also part, subversive tool to do something different in online area.
It's a sort of neo-colonialism still to get them
Yeah.
being underdeveloped and under control.
Yes, and when you read these stories, about free basics, and even Wikipedia Zero, for example, it is also one of these deals. You in Angola, for example, you will have free Wikipedia just with Portuguese articles, something related to Angola, but you don't have you cannot access anything else than Wikipedia and that part of Wikipedia. So some organizations in Angola and hackers and everything, they decided to hide files in articles. For example, you can read, I don't know, monument in Angola, but actually you can download some movie or some musical album. It's very interesting.
Okay. Yeah, funny. And talking about the internet itself, and as understood in Africa, or at least in this part of Africa, they're not so really connected to the rest of the world. But coming to your topic, are they at least familiar with memes and what memes represent? And can you
I
tell us,
asked
to our audience, why it's your topic?
Yes. Well, first of all, they are connected. They are online, but they are not online in the same way we are. So that's an inequality. And about memes, of course, I asked friends in Angola, and then of course everybody said yes, we have this one about president, and they have some kind of categorizations, on different memes. And what is interesting, I suppose this Know Your Meme website, which is very big database of memes.
Okay.
It's like a meme and Know Your Meme, yes.
Yeah.
But of course, if you search for Yugoslavia or Africa, you will not find anything there because it's a New York database. But Africans, they are collecting their memes on the website called Zikoko. So Zikoko is their meme database.
Okay.
Where you can see examples or trends or
African meme database. Whoa, I can only imagine how it looks like.
No, it's cool.
Lots of stereotypes in my mind, but I would not like to say any of them.
Well, actually, in my opinion, stereotypes are more present. There is something in theory, but also in online reality called digital blackface. And digital blackface is more related to stereotypes, and it's more present, maybe not so much in memes, but in reaction photos and gifs. Mostly when we use reactions, Black people are present there. But when you see this African database, actually more you can see some politicians or some current events and memes made out of them.
Okay. And they're interconnected with each other across the countries, or just specific country, or again language based, like, I don't know, tribes living in different countries, or French or English memes? How is it separated?
Yeah, this is as I saw, this is not so big database. They when I saw it, it had something like 4,000 or 5,000 memes, which is not so much, but it's okay. They started actually, collecting, and mostly they were related to, as I remember, Nigeria, some of them Angola, and some of them from west part of African continent. But I believe, of course, every country, and of course, when we speak about Arab Spring, for example, and these protests, everybody will speak about Facebook and social media, but I believe these protests would happen without social media also. But there is an influence, and of course they are using. And what is also interesting, for example, this is something from experience, Africans, they are using WhatsApp mostly. And we read also about that, because WhatsApp had different policies until recently, because Facebook bought WhatsApp. But before that, WhatsApp was used because it is easier, because of this low bandwidth, and then also because you have this communication between 2G, 3G, 5G, and it is easier when you have application without restrictions. And
they're basically hustling. They find a solution wherever they can, and they use it as best as they have the opportunity to do so. Yeah.
Well, people are always doing this.
Always find a way. That's why people in the Balkans and Turkey, they were always hustling, always in some bad conditions, and that's why they can connect and understand the Africans to some extent. Yeah.
For the digitalization of the museums, what can be done for that topic? Also, because of the COVID, mostly the visitors of the museums were changed a lot. And people are now more focused on the digital consuming of the cultural thing as well, like cinema and also the museums.
Well, yes, I agree with you. And of course, as every museum during COVID, we used, of course, our social media, virtual tours, virtual exhibitions, and everything. But when quarantine was over, we also noticed that a lot of people came physically to the museum. And actually they did not want, they actually wanted to be alone in the museum and just to walk and enjoy, and some kind of meditation, I believe,
True.
or just to feel that atmosphere. So we learned that we should not maybe always give, I don't know, guided tours, or boring curators speaking 3 hours and killing people who are standing there in the space. So I don't know what is the best idea for the future, but I believe every museum, because to work in the museum, and museums, they have very responsible positions within every society. So if we speak about these problems, we just mentioned digital colonialism, but we can also speak about privacy problems on the internet, about third part cookies, I mean, corporations, everything. So I believe the role of the museums would have to be a very responsible one, where we could educate people about internet problems, and also at the same time using internet in very responsible and ethical way. So I hope I
It also it is also like important for them to be accessible in that way on the internet, because not everyone in the city of that museum or have budget all the time for visiting there.
Not only this, but some people are disabled people, are not living close by, and they still have the accessibility of it in a digital form. Is for sure it should exist, but I would also prefer more to be physically present there, as Ana said, maybe to meditate, just to enjoy in my way that I am living it, and that's it. But to have both as options, it's always a good thing.
Yes, we are trying to use both options, because
Hmm.
we need both of them. But of course, me as a millennial, somebody who is born during 90s, maybe we are now we have some kind of overdose of digital information.
True.
I mean, I'm writing PhD thesis about internet memes, and I believe when I finish this, I will be offline. Because it's too much.
Again, talking about the memes, how did you come up with the idea to cover the memes, and what exactly is the topic of your PhD? Not that our audience think, oh, she's just watching memes and just writing what she sees. Yes.
Well, as I said and on the beginning, maybe you noticed that for me, for example, movies and architecture are the most, how to say, the most relaxed form of art, the most common form of art, the form of art we can understand. Everybody can understand this forms of art. And of course, when we speak about memes, somebody would say that memes are also a form of art. In some way they are, in some way maybe they are not.
People need
Maybe,
to be creative for it, for sure.
yeah, it's folk art or maybe something like that. But for me, the question was, what about these memes, what they mean, today, and what kind of memory we are creating with these memes. The question actually came because I recognized very old baroque art form emblems. They are the same like memes. You have title, you have image, and then you have subscription. They are very old form emblems.
Do you think about, when you talk about this, do you mean the ones that, for instance, for about Napoleon, like when British made those caricatures about making fun of him? It's
But
also
these are caricatures, but
caricatures, yeah.
even before cartoons and caricatures, you had these very specific emblems. It's the name, but
Uh-huh.
they are memes in a
I got it.
sense.
Oh yeah,
So
true.
I started to make this analysis, through different historical periods when we speak about the form of memes. But when we speak about the content, I started to analyze our local memes for
Hmm.
post-Yugoslav space. That's
Hmm.
my area, because I've noticed also that we are not so present in these Western databases when we speak about memes. I mean,
Hmm.
mostly you cannot see the most important in most popular internet memes on these databases. So I have a lot of questions in this thesis, but it's not easy. It's not easy at all to write it, because internet has it's huge. A lot of memes are there all the time, and all the time, I write, and then I see something new, and then, oh my god, I have to do this again and again, and it never stops. But a lot of academics are writing about internet memes, because of Donald Trump and this. Even you have a term, Great Meme War, during 2015 and 16. They are writing about political role of memes, about linguistic role of memes, about the different, histories on the internet through internet memes. So my idea was to show our memes as a case study, and to problematize actually memory and the question of cultural memory through memes.
Interesting. I honestly never thought in this sense about the memes. I guess on it you too as well. I mean,
No.
as you said, memes can share the situation in a specific time of our lives, of our history, and they're sort of a way how people express themselves. And when you compare the time period and what happened in that period, and compare it with memes and the content of those memes, then you can truly understand to some extent how people felt back then and what it meant for them. Yeah, it's amazing to be honest. Yeah.
No, memes are they raise a lot of questions, in different areas and disciplines. We can speak about politics, about art, about existential conditions, mental issues. I mean, different problems, very complex topic, and they are there, all the time, just making more and more memes.
Somehow people use it to diffuse the situation, like when pressure is piling up, they use the meme. And I know a few of my friends, they're like memers, as they call themselves. I don't like to call them like that, but they call themselves like this. And I see it's kind of like their coping mechanism with the reality. They just make memes of funny things, internal and external topics, and it's kind of like
It's
a
also
psychological
used in
therapy.
in political fights a lot.
As she mentioned, 2015, 16,
Yeah.
with meme wars. Yeah.
Yes. I asked this question, of course, my friends in Angola and in general, and I wanted to know how they are using memes. And I mean, politics are always present in every part of the world. They are part of this memosphere or meme logic, but of course they are used even for most incredible and different situations. I mean, I have WhatsApp and social media conversations with friends, and you can see just memes, nothing else.
Yeah.
We are
Or GIFs.
communicating.
Yeah. Through GIFs and
Also,
memes.
they're very educative. For example, the meme that we mentioned at the beginning of the episode about the British Museum. You have to know what does it mean to understand that. So probably a lot of people research about the joke, like because they didn't understand, and they learn what happened.
They could, yes, of course they could be. And it's very interesting form of expression, because very quickly you get the message if you know. If you don't know, of course, as you said, you have to search for it. But the problem is, I think, when you have, of course, that you have alt-right memes, or different
Sure.
disinformation in memes, and that's something which is problematic and could be dangerous. And maybe that, for example, the left can't meme is a meme. They made this joke about left parties or left ideologies, because I believe, because simply left parties or left ideologies, they don't make this very banal and stereotype expressions about anything, because they are within this political correctness or something like that. But when we speak about right wing or alt-right, they are all the time making this juxtapositions. So it raises very complicated questions. I believe memes can be powerful, but also they can be dangerous. It depends on the reader.
Interesting outtake. It depends on the reader. It depends on the motives of the behind the meme, of the political alignment, or you name it, the mood that person had, and then the impact can be enormous. Yeah, when you're digital person, when you're digital present, not like unless in situation in Africa or some parts of Asia where they're not so much involved. That's a different thing.
Yes, but for example, this Pepe the Frog meme.
Yes.
The frog. So this meme, for example, was created in 2005, and it is part of the cartoon. Very cool cartoon. But somebody, of course, on some forum or 4chan or something like that, they decided to use that as a reaction photo. And Pepe the Frog, he was a reaction photo a lot of years. And then when Trump and his elections came, everything was different. Pepe is some kind of protective sign for his political campaign. And actually, I think officially Pepe in USA today is a hate symbol, official hate symbol, because a lot of reinterpretations in a very alt-right, right-wing way happened. But what is interesting, in 2019 in China, Pepe is signed for democratic changes and protests. So you know that China has different internet in general. I mean, the different online space. But that happened, and in that way, memes are very polysemic. They have very different meanings in different parts of the world.
Like you mentioned, China, Winnie the Pooh. In China, is
Yeah.
forbidden because it represents, for our audience that don't know, Xi Jinping, so to say, that he looks like
Yeah.
Winnie the Pooh. That's why I don't know if it's totally forbidden in China as a
It
Disney
is,
cartoon.
yeah.
Okay. So,
In the Disney parks as well, like they don't have that character.
okay. So there is Eeyore, there is Tiger, there is, and where's the, I don't know, take sabbatical leave or something.
Yeah, in meme world, everything happens. Everything could happen actually.
And in the real world as well. I mean, I would like to sum up this episode with a bit outtake from your side in terms of future. How do you see the future of ex-Yugoslav countries with connection to Africa and Africa culture?
The future. Well, I'm, to be honest, skeptical about the future. I mean, I'm mostly in the past, in history, and in the museum. I'm working and I'm living in accordance with this knowledge from, and actually this heritage. And of course, it functions and it is very interesting context, but I'm well aware that museum is just, very, very small part of this world in general. And I love to believe that museums are powerful institutions and that we can make some change in the world. But all the time, I mean, my experience is modest. I'm still, I hope, young, and I have just a few years of experience. But for now, I don't see some, how to say, bright future. I believe the things will continue in the similar way as they are now. I hope it will not get worse or something like that. But I don't see some kind of utopia, if we understand Yugoslavia or non-aligned movement as some kind of utopia from today's perspective. I cannot say that I believe this will happen again in the future. I believe that we can just understand this as very important, very valuable heritage, and then we can keep it and speak about it, and try to live in accordance with it.
Yeah, I agree. To preserve the connections that are still present, not to close our eyes and pretend they don't exist. They exist, not in terms, as you mentioned, monuments, but also through people. To ex-students from ex-Yugoslavia, to present students in Serbia, to trade, to whatever, to having similar political alignments, it should be preserved and developed more in the future. It's a waste of opportunity if we don't continue in this direction. And your museum is doing a wonderful job of expressing through expositions, through these classes of African languages, such as Swahili, of connecting people from Africa living in Belgrade with the locals. You're doing an amazing work, and I wish you all the best and to continue, especially for this day that we're going to have this episode published, 25th of May, the Day of Africa. So I want to congratulate you and your museum this day and to celebrate it as best way possible. And yeah,
It's very inspiring and also like leading for better better way.
Thank you very much. We hope to see you in the museum for maybe Afro Festival or some other event.
Definitely. We will share the links for both those events for 25th of May and for the Afro Festival and other events for sure. And I hope that you'll be more connected to African countries in the future, that digital development will come there and you will go more and visit them and go back and forward. It will be really a good thing to make museum more rich in that sense of more artifacts and more connections between Africa and the museum itself.
I hope so too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ana, once more for your time. I wish you all the best and we'll stay in contact.
Thank you.
And not to forget for our audience, we always forget this part. Please, please do like, that part of promotion. Yeah. Who likes to promote? Nobody. So people, please like, share, dislike, whatever you want to do. It means a lot to us for this episode with Ana to be pushed through the algorithm, to be more reached out, and for many people like you to see it and check it out and to hear it.
Please support and click all the buttons you'll find under this video.
Exactly. See you all. Have a nice day.
Ciao.
Bye bye.
Ciao.